It was a bold gamble. For in the 1970s, Orsay was an abandoned monument.
The spaces were very dirty, very damaged. It was an abandoned station.
At that time, there was absolutely no awareness of any architectural interest in the station itself. It was seen as old-fashioned, belonging to the 19th century.
But in 1972, the idea of an entirely new museum took shape at the Direction des Musées de France. It would exhibit works of art from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This station, typical of La Belle Époque, would establish itself as a showcase of choice.
We're really dealing with a fairly unique case on the museum scene, home and abroad. There is a total harmony between the building, a station built for the Paris Exposition of 1900, and the collections.
An architectural competition was launched in 1978. Contrary to expectations, the winning project is that of a team of 3 young architects: Pierre Colboc, Renaud Baudon, and Jean-Paul Philippon.
When you win a competition like that and you're young, you're on a little cloud, and then you think, we'll have to deliver.
The team was extremely smart and said, hang on, let's start from the station's qualities. In particular, this big nave. Orsay station then became not something cumbersome to be accommodated, but on the contrary, the mainspring of the museum.
The strength of the young architect's project was to reinterpret the station while respecting its structure. The work began in 1980, and more than 80 years after its construction, the monument's fabulous metal structure was once again laid bare.
The building had to be totally stripped back. They obviously kept its structure, but took everything off to ensure that the new museum would be perfectly solid and appropriate.
Many elements that were too badly damaged were restored to their original state, like the god Mercury who overlooks the large glass roof, or the paintings that adorn the ceilings of the reception spaces. The salle de fête was re-gilded in gold leaf to give the monument all of its 1900 luster. But other elements at the station would be completely rethought.
The biggest challenges obviously concerned our position in relation to the station. What do we keep? What don't we keep?
To make a museum out of the station, the first thing required was to work on the monument's foundations, which had already shown their weakness only 10 years after the building of the station.
In 1910, 10 years after the station was built, we had the biggest flood Paris had ever seen.
It would be remembered as the flood of the century. In January 1910, the level of the Seine rose 8 meters. Hundreds of streets and close to 20,000 buildings were flooded. As for the station, only 42 meters from the river, and with underground tracks, it was engulfed by the rising waters.
Due to the pressure of the Seine, huge amounts of water leaked in. Orsay station was like a swimming pool.
Thanks to the pumps provided to evacuate the water, the station was able to resume its activity without too much damage. But for the new museum, such a flood would be catastrophic. Because these aren't underground trains, they're works of art.
In the 80s, architects and engineers thought about the best way to protect a monument containing works. As in their initial program, we already had our reserves in the basement.
In the case of a museum, it is crucial to keep the work safe, even if a Seine were to rise.
1.5 meters below the level of the tracks, they poured an apron of concrete. A huge layer, on average 80 centimeters thick, molded the whole basement of the station under the museum's reserves. To guarantee the stability of the infrastructure, 1,236 micropiles were planted in the slab and fixed in the limestone of the basement.
The micropiles are anchors into the ground, which have made it possible to impart stability to the whole structure and to guard against the pressures water can bring, especially when in flood.
In addition to the foundations, the museum architects would also review the configuration of the monument to manage the influx of people. In the station's time, the traveller entered by the facade on the Seine and left behind the clock by the arrival canopy.
Entering a museum from the river on this very broad facade in the wind seemed out of the question. So we simply invert the operating system. Instead of entering on the riverside, we enter by the arrival canopy.
That was probably one of the strong points. You can feel it today. It's great to have that perspective when you enter.
Enhanced by this new configuration, the nave would truly be at the heart of the museum. In place of the tracks, the architects created an interior street lined with mezzanines, climbing upward in successive steps.
We progress like this, slowly, seeing works on either side. We had these walls re-emerge symbolically, if you will, in the direction of the tracks.
Design of these new walls was entrusted to a bold interior designer, Gaye Aulenti. She designed geometric shapes that stand out from the rest of the station, thanks also to the material used, boxy stone, an amber yellow limestone produced in Burgundy.
The eye knows immediately, thanks to the materials and the colours used, what is from 1900 and what was from the 1980s.
The entire space of the nave and the Great Hall is thus transformed into exhibition rooms. But once again in its history, the monument lacked space. The station floors represented an available surface of 30,000 meters squared. An extra 13,000 meters squared were required to exhibit the museum's greatest treasures, the Impressionist masterpieces of Renoir and Monet.
So, where do we put the Impressionists? We chose to put them in this unused attic that Lalou had created.